Now I get to talk about color modes and color channels, and I actually really like talking about this. If you want to get a little nerdy with me about Photoshop, just get me started about color modes and color channels. You've been using color modes already with Illustrator. You know, you have RGB and you have CMYK, and if your artwork is going to print, you primarily will use CMYK. If it's going primarily to the screen, you'll use, RGB. But in Photoshop, you have a little bit more of a connection to your color modes because you also have access to color channels. All right, so let me go ahead and show you. I'm here in number 4 for color modes and channels, and I have a smart object with just a kind of a fun little image that obviously I picked this because we are talking about RGB, red, green, and blue. Now, if I go to my image size, you can see image size, it's 1920 by 1080. It's a decent resolution document. And if I go to image mode, you can see currently I'm in RGB color mode. And in Photoshop, you'll mostly use RGB or CMYK. There are others. Lab mode is a really big color space that a lot of photographers like to use for doing really pushing their color correction. But for the most part, as you're learning Photoshop, you'll always use RGB or CMYK. But what's cool about that is let's go ahead and change it to CMYK. All right. Now, normally with your artwork, you don't want to go back and forth because you are altering colors just a little bit every time. So you tend to want to just do this a few times. But if I go to my channels, and channels are normally next to layers. If they're not, you go up to Window, Channels, and they'll show up there. And you can see this is where we can actually see how the colors are separated with Photoshop. And this is what made Photoshop very powerful back in the beginning of the image editing sort of revolution. So that first channel is what's called our composite layer. And then I can click and actually see how cyan is used. And the brighter the color, you can see magenta, yellow, and black, right? So we can actually see how the colors are working here. And since CMYK is a subtractive color mode, you can see kind of how they react with that method. Now, if I go back to RGB, right, there's our composite, which is everything. But if I click on red, because RGB is a additive color mode, when you add all the colors together, you get white. So you can see we have red, green, and blue. Red's the brighter one here, green, and blue. And for a lot of what you do inside Photoshop, you don't have to access the color modes like we used to. Now that we have layers and all these other tools, you're kind of removed from having to do the deal with color channels. However, when it comes to really advanced selections and techniques, it's very handy sometimes to pop over to your color channels and utilize them in making a selection. Plus, understanding how color channels work really help you understand video color correction a whole lot better. Okay, so just be aware. If I go back here, be aware that we have RGB and CMYK all under the image mode area here. And again, don't worry about those others at the moment. We'll get into the relevant ones at a later date.